When Wilhelm II stepped down in 1918, he left behind more than an empire in turmoil. He left 7 children, each caught in the aftershock of monarchy, war, exile, and realignment. In the decades that followed, some embraced politics, some faded into private life, one ended tragically early, and others became the link between a vanished imperial world and modern Europe. The crown prince would command armies and flirt with fascism. A naval officer would retreat to Swiss exile. One son would join the Nazi party while another devoted himself to charity. The youngest prince would take his own life, unable to adapt to a world without crowns, and the only daughter would become the bridge between old dynasties and new European royalty. In this video, we'll trace each of those 7 lives, from the Palace of Potsdam to the ruins of the Kaiserreich, from Nazi entanglements to quiet legacies, to answer the question, what became of the Kaiser's children? On November 9, 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated his throne, bringing to an end over 4 centuries of Hohenzollern rule in Brandenburg and Prussia. The German Empire collapsed, the monarchy vanished, and Europe's old order crumbled into the dust of the Great War's aftermath. But Wilhelm's personal story didn't end with his flight to the Netherlands, because waiting in the wings were 7 children who had been raised to inherit a world that suddenly no longer existed. These weren't just any royal children. They were the heirs to the most powerful throne in continental Europe, raised in the splendor of Potsdam's palaces, educated for roles in an empire that stretched from the Rhine to the Russian border. Each had been given a specific place in the dynastic machine, the crown prince destined to rule, the others to serve in the military, marry strategically, and maintain the family's prestige across generations. Instead, they found themselves adrift in a Republican Germany that had no use for princes, watching their father spend his final decades in Dutch exile while they navigated between nostalgia for the old world and adaptation to the new. Some would embrace radical politics, others would retreat into privacy. Some would find ways to serve their country without a crown, while others would struggle to find any purpose at all. Wilhelm II and his wife, Augusta Viktoria, had raised their children in an atmosphere of imperial confidence and military tradition. Now those same children would have to forge new identities in a world where monarchy had become, at best, a curiosity and, at worst, an embarrassment. We will go through each child in depth, their birth and upbringing, what they did with their lives, their families, and how they related to their imperial father. Finally, we'll look at what legacy they left behind and how the Hohenzollern bloodline continues today. Let's begin with the eldest, the Crown Prince. Born into imperial expectation on May 6, 1882, at the Marmorpalais in Potsdam, Crown Prince Wilhelm Friedrich Ludwig was the future of the German Empire incarnate. From his first breath, he carried the weight of 400 years of Hohenzollern dynasty on his infant shoulders. His grandfather was already Kaiser Wilhelm I. The Iron Chancellor Bismarck was reshaping Europe, and little Wilhelm was destined to inherit it all. His upbringing reflected these enormous expectations. While his younger siblings could enjoy relative freedom, Wilhelm was groomed for sovereignty from childhood. He received the finest military education Prussia could offer, studying at the Plön Cadet School and later at the University of Bonn. His father, Kaiser Wilhelm II, insisted on rigorous military training. The future Kaiser needed to understand the army that would be his ultimate source of power. The Crown Prince showed early promise as a soldier and developed a particular affinity for the officer corps. By 1914, when Europe tumbled into war, he had achieved the rank of Oberst and commanded significant respect within military circles. When the Great War erupted, he was given command of the German Fifth Army and participated in some of the conflict's most brutal campaigns. At Verdun in 1916, Crown Prince Wilhelm commanded German forces in one of history's longest and bloodiest battles. For 10 months, German and French armies bled each other white in the fortress city's ruins. The Crown Prince's leadership during this hellish campaign earned him both military distinction and the association with some of the war's worst carnage. When Germany's defeat became inevitable, he was among the senior commanders who advised his father that continuation was impossible. The collapse of 1918 sent the Crown Prince fleeing to the Netherlands alongside his father. For 5 years, he lived in Dutch exile, watching the Weimar Republic struggle to establish itself while monarchist movements across Germany dreamed of restoration. In 1923, he returned to Germany, officially renouncing his rights to succession in exchange for permission to live on family estates. But the Crown Prince hadn't abandoned political ambitions. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, he became increasingly attracted to radical right-wing movements that promised to restore German greatness. When Adolf Hitler rose to power, Crown Prince Wilhelm initially saw opportunity. Perhaps the Nazis could pave the way for monarchist restoration. This calculation proved disastrously wrong. By the mid-1930s, Hitler had made clear that the Third Reich had no place for competing sources of loyalty. The Crown Prince found himself marginalized, watched by the Gestapo, and eventually banned from wearing military uniform or participating in public ceremonies. The man who had once expected to rule an empire became a private citizen living quietly on his estates. Crown Prince Wilhelm had married Duchess Cecilia of Mecklenburg-Schwerin in 1905, a union that produced 6 children and secured the Hohenzollern succession. Their eldest son, Louis Ferdinand, would become a significant figure in his own right, serving as the family's representative in exile and eventually passing leadership to his own son, Georg Friedrich, who remains the head of the House of Hohenzollern today. The relationship between the Crown Prince and his father was complicated by the weight of dynastic expectations and the reality of political failure. Kaiser Wilhelm II had dreamed his eldest son would restore the family's fortunes, but the Crown Prince's flirtation with Nazism damaged the dynasty's reputation. Their relationship became strained during the 1930s, particularly after Hitler's regime made clear that monarchy would never return. In his final years, Crown Prince Wilhelm lived quietly, watching Germany endure defeat, occupation, and division. He died on July 20, 1951, the same date as the failed 1944 plot against Hitler, a coincidence that seemed to underscore how completely the old imperial world had vanished. His death marked the end of the most direct line between the Kaiser's hopes and political reality. The Crown Prince's legacy remains complex. He preserved the Hohenzollern bloodline and raised children who would maintain the family's presence in German society. But his political choices, particularly his early Nazi sympathies, complicated his father's legacy and demonstrated how difficult the transition from monarchy to modernity could be. Through his descendants, however, the family line continues, adapting to serve Germany in ways the old Kaiser could never have imagined. Born on July 7, 1883, just 14 months after his older brother, Prince Eitel Friedrich Victor Adolf, entered a world where expectations were high, but the pressure was slightly less intense. As the second son, he wouldn't inherit the throne, but he was still expected to embody Prussian military tradition and serve the dynasty with distinction. Eitel Friedrich's childhood unfolded in the same imperial splendor as his siblings, moving between the various Hohenzollern palaces and receiving the military education considered essential for Prussian princes. He showed particular aptitude for the traditional officer's life, joining the Guards regiment and displaying the kind of disciplined professionalism that made Prussian officers the envy of European armies. His early adult years included diplomatic and military assignments that took him across Europe. He spent time in St. Petersburg, where the Hohenzollerns maintained complex family relationships with the Russian Romanovs. These experiences gave him a broader perspective on European politics than some of his more domestically focused siblings, and he developed a reputation as a competent, if not brilliant, military professional. When the Great War erupted in 1914, Eitel Friedrich threw himself into military service with the dedication expected of a Prussian prince. He served on both the Western and Eastern fronts, participating in major campaigns and earning recognition for his courage under fire. Unlike his older brother, who commanded at the strategic level, Eitel Friedrich served more directly with troops, gaining first-hand experience of the war's brutal realities. The military collapse of 1918 and his father's abdication hit Eitel Friedrich particularly hard. He had devoted his life to serving the imperial system, and suddenly that system no longer existed. Unlike the Crown Prince, who harbored political ambitions, Eitel Friedrich's identity was more narrowly focused on military service and traditional loyalty. During the chaotic years of the Weimar Republic, Eitel Friedrich gravitated toward veteran organizations and monarchist groups that promised to preserve something of the old military culture. He became involved with the Stahlhelm, a right-wing veterans organization that combined nostalgia for the imperial military with opposition to the Democratic Republic. He also participated in Semper Tallis, a group dedicated to maintaining connections between former officers. Significantly, when the Nazi Party began its rise to power, Eitel Friedrich remained skeptical. Unlike his brother August Wilhelm, who would join the Nazi Party, Eitel Friedrich recognized that National Socialism represented something fundamentally different from traditional Prussian conservatism. He opposed Hitler's movement, understanding that it threatened the values he had spent his life defending. This principled opposition cost him. During the Nazi years, Eitel Friedrich found himself increasingly isolated, watched by authorities who viewed him as a potential rallying point for traditional conservative opposition. He lived quietly, maintaining his dignity while avoiding the political compromises that attracted some of his siblings. Eitel Friedrich's personal life reflected both the expectations and limitations of his position. In 1906, he married Princess Sophia Charlotte of Oldenburg, a union that promised to strengthen dynastic ties and produce the next generation of Hohenzollerns. However, the marriage struggled under the pressures of political upheaval and personal incompatibility. The couple divorced in 1926, and significantly, they had no children. This childlessness represented a dynastic dead end. While his brothers were ensuring the continuation of various Hohenzollern lines, Eitel Friedrich's branch would end with him. In the context of a royal family suddenly deprived of political purpose, the inability to produce heirs carried particular poignancy. His relationship with Kaiser Wilhelm II reflected the complicated dynamics of a family adjusting to exile and irrelevance. Eitel Friedrich remained loyal to his father, but their relationship was colored by the older man's disappointment with his children's various adaptations to post-imperial life. The Kaiser had expected his sons to somehow restore the family's fortunes, but Eitel Friedrich's path led toward honorable obscurity rather than political relevance. Eitel Friedrich died on December 8, 1942, in the midst of another world war that Germany was destined to lose. His death came at a time when his principled opposition to Nazism appeared increasingly prescient, though few were paying attention to the opinions of a retired Prussian prince. His legacy lies not in political achievement or dynastic continuation, but in his representation of traditional Prussian military values during a period when those values were under assault from both democratic transformation and totalitarian innovation. He embodied a path not taken, the possibility of maintaining honor and dignity while adapting to political irrelevance, refusing the temptations of extremism that attracted other members of his family. Eitel Friedrich's story illustrates how the collapse of monarchy affected different personalities in different ways, and how personal character shaped individual responses to historical upheaval. Born on July 14, 1884, Prince Adalbert Ferdinand Berengar Victor was destined for the sea from an early age. As the third son of Kaiser Wilhelm II, Adalbert found his calling in Germany's rapidly expanding imperial navy, embarking on a career that would take him from the Baltic to the North Sea and eventually into Swiss exile. Adalbert's upbringing reflected his father's grand naval ambitions. Kaiser Wilhelm II was obsessed with challenging British naval supremacy, and he saw his sons as instruments for achieving that goal. While the Crown Prince was groomed for the throne and Eitel Friedrich for the army, Adalbert was directed toward the Kriegsmarine, where he could help build the fleet that would make Germany a global power. The young prince embraced naval life with enthusiasm. He attended the Naval Academy at Kiel, where he studied navigation, seamanship, and the complex technical skills required for modern naval warfare. His instructors found him competent and dedicated, if not exceptionally brilliant. More importantly, he genuinely loved the sea and the disciplined life of a naval officer. Adalbert's early career coincided with the great age of naval construction that preceded World War I. He served aboard various vessels as Germany built the high seas fleet that would challenge Britain's Royal Navy. He experienced the excitement of launching new battleships and the pride of serving in what many Germans believed would become the world's finest naval force. When war erupted in 1914, Adalbert was serving as a lieutenant aboard SMS Groudens, a light cruiser. Naval warfare in the Great War proved very different from the decisive battles that naval theorists had predicted. Instead of epic fleet engagements, much of the war at sea involved submarine warfare, convoy duty, and the slow strangulation of commerce raiding. Adalbert participated in several significant naval operations, including sorties into the North Sea and support operations for submarine campaigns. He experienced combat during the Battle of Jutland in 1916, the largest naval engagement of the war, where the German High Seas Fleet met the British Grand Fleet in a confused and inconclusive battle that nonetheless demonstrated Germany's inability to break British naval supremacy. The naval mutinies of late 1918, which helped trigger Germany's final collapse, deeply affected Adalbert. The sailors' revolt represented everything he had been trained to oppose: indiscipline, political activism within the military, and the breakdown of traditional authority. When his father abdicated, Adalbert found his entire worldview challenged. Unlike some of his brothers, Adalbert chose withdrawal over political engagement. After the war's end, he moved to Switzerland, purchasing property where he could live quietly away from the political turmoil consuming Germany. This self-imposed exile reflected both practical concerns about safety and a genuine desire to escape the conflicts that were tearing his homeland apart. In Switzerland, Adalbert lived the life of a private gentleman, pursuing interests in agriculture and local affairs while maintaining minimal contact with German politics. He avoided the monarchist movements that attracted some of his siblings and showed no interest in the radical politics that would eventually consume Germany. Adalbert's family life provided the stability that political engagement could not. In 1914, he had married Princess Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen, a union that proved both personally happy and dynastically significant. The couple produced 2 children, Viktoria Marina, born in 1917, and Wilhelm Victor, born in 1919. These children represented the continuation of the Hohenzollern line through a branch that had chosen discretion over prominence. Viktoria Marina and Wilhelm Victor would grow up as private citizens carrying royal blood, but living ordinary lives far from the political controversies that plagued other branches of the family. Their descendants continue today, maintaining the family connection while avoiding public attention. Adalbert's relationship with his father was marked by mutual respect, but also by distance. Kaiser Wilhelm II appreciated his son's loyalty and discretion, but he was disappointed by Adalbert's withdrawal from German affairs. The Kaiser had hoped his children would work to restore the family's political fortunes, but Adalbert had chosen personal peace over dynastic ambition. This choice proved wise. While other Hohenzollern princes became entangled in the political extremism of the interwar years, Adalbert maintained his dignity and avoided compromising associations. His Swiss exile provided safety during the Nazi years and allowed him to observe German events from a distance. Adalbert died on September 22, 1948, having lived through both world wars and the complete transformation of European politics. His death came as Germany was being rebuilt under Allied occupation, and the old imperial world he had served seemed more distant than ever. His legacy lies in his demonstration that royal children could adapt to political irrelevance through dignified withdrawal rather than desperate political maneuvering. The continuation of his family line through his children proved that dynastic survival didn't require political prominence. Sometimes the wisest response to historical upheaval was simply to step aside and let history pass by. Born on January 29, 1887, Prince August Wilhelm Heinrich Gunther Victor would become perhaps the most politically controversial of Kaiser Wilhelm II's sons. His path from Prussian prince to Nazi party member illustrates how the collapse of the old order could drive royal children toward radical extremism in their search for relevance and purpose. August Wilhelm's childhood followed the familiar pattern of his older brothers: military education, court ceremony, and preparation for a life of service to the Hohenzollern dynasty. He showed early intellectual promise and seemed destined for a distinguished career within the imperial system. His tutors found him quick-witted and politically engaged, qualities that would later prove both advantageous and dangerous. As the fourth son, August Wilhelm faced the challenge of finding a distinctive role within the family hierarchy. The crown prince would inherit the throne. Eitel Friedrich commanded respect as a military professional, and Adalbert had found his calling in the navy. August Wilhelm needed to carve out his own niche, and he increasingly gravitated toward politics and public affairs. The Great War provided August Wilhelm with opportunities for military service, but his experiences differed from those of his brothers. He served primarily in staff positions rather than direct combat roles, giving him exposure to the political and logistical aspects of warfare. This background would prove significant later, as it provided him with insights into the connections between military and political power. The collapse of 1918 and the establishment of the Weimar Republic left August Wilhelm adrift in ways that affected him more profoundly than some of his siblings. While others retreated into private life or focused on preserving traditional values, August Wilhelm became obsessed with the possibility of political restoration through radical means. During the 1920s, he gravitated toward various right-wing political movements that promised to overthrow the Republic and restore German greatness. He was attracted to organizations that combined monarchist nostalgia with revolutionary energy, seeing them as potential vehicles for returning his family to power. When Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party began its dramatic rise during the late 1920s and early 1930s, August Wilhelm saw opportunity. In 1930, he made the fateful decision to join the Nazi Party, becoming one of the most prominent aristocrats to throw his support behind Hitler's movement. This decision reflected both personal ambition and genuine political conviction. August Wilhelm believed that National Socialism could serve as a stepping stone to monarchist restoration, that Hitler would eventually restore the Kaiser and return the Hohenzollerns to power. He also shared many Nazi beliefs about German racial superiority and the need for authoritarian leadership. Hitler initially welcomed August Wilhelm's support, recognizing the propaganda value of having a Prussian prince in the party ranks. August Wilhelm was given significant responsibilities, rising to the rank of SA Obergruppenführer and serving as a member of the Reichstag from 1932 to 1942. He became one of the Nazi Party's most visible aristocratic supporters. However, August Wilhelm's usefulness to the Nazi regime was always limited. Hitler had no intention of restoring the monarchy, and by the late 1930s, the Führer was actively working to eliminate all potential competing sources of loyalty and authority. August Wilhelm found himself increasingly marginalized as the regime consolidated power. The final break came in 1942, when Hitler decided that even symbolic aristocratic participation in the Nazi Party had become counterproductive. August Wilhelm was dismissed from his positions and effectively exiled from political life. He spent the final years of the war under suspicion, watched by the Gestapo as a potential source of opposition. After Germany's defeat in 1945, August Wilhelm faced denazification proceedings. His prominent role in the Nazi Party made him a target for Allied investigators, and he was interned while authorities determined his level of responsibility for Nazi crimes. He was eventually released but remained under restrictions until his death. August Wilhelm's personal life provided some compensation for his political disappointments. In 1908, he had married Princess Alexandra Viktoria of Schleswig-Holstein, and the couple produced one son, Alexander Ferdinand, born in 1912. This child would carry on the family line while carefully distancing himself from his father's political choices. The relationship between August Wilhelm and his father was severely strained by the son's Nazi involvement. Kaiser Wilhelm II had initially hoped that his children's political activities might somehow benefit the family, but August Wilhelm's extremism proved embarrassing and counterproductive. The Kaiser privately expressed disappointment with his son's choices, particularly after it became clear that Hitler would never restore the monarchy. August Wilhelm died on March 25, 1949, a broken man whose political gamble had failed catastrophically. His death came as Germany was beginning to rebuild itself under democratic institutions, making his Nazi past seem even more shameful and irrelevant. His legacy serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of political extremism and the tragic consequences that could result when royal children sought relevance through association with radical movements. August Wilhelm's story illustrates how the collapse of traditional authority could drive individuals toward desperate political choices that ultimately destroyed both their personal honor and their family's reputation. Born on July 27, 1888, Prince Oskar Karl Gustav Adolf was destined to become the most quietly distinguished of Kaiser Wilhelm II's sons. While his brothers pursued military glory, political engagement, or exile, Oskar would find his calling in charitable service and the preservation of traditional Christian values through one of Europe's oldest chivalric orders. Oskar's early life followed the established pattern for Prussian princes: rigorous education, military training, and preparation for service to the dynasty. He joined the Guards Regiment and showed competence as a military officer, though he lacked the aggressive ambition that characterized some of his siblings. His temperament was more suited to steady service than spectacular achievement. During World War I, Oskar served with distinction on various fronts. He was wounded in action, an experience that deepened his understanding of human suffering and strengthened his commitment to charitable work. Unlike brothers who emerged from the war with political ambitions or bitter disillusionment, Oskar developed a sense of calling towards service that transcended political systems. The collapse of the monarchy in 1918 affected Oskar differently than his siblings. Rather than seeking political restoration or retreating into complete privacy, he began exploring ways to serve German society through non-political institutions. This search would eventually lead him to the Order of St. John, known in Germany as the Johanniter Orden. In 1926, Oskar was elected Herrenmeister of the Johanniter Orden, beginning a tenure that would last until his death in 1958. This position placed him at the head of one of the oldest charitable organizations in Europe, an institution that had provided medical care, disaster relief, and social services for nearly 9 centuries. The Johanniter Orden presented unique challenges during Oskar's leadership. The organization had to navigate the political upheavals of the Weimar Republic, the Nazi period, and post-war reconstruction while maintaining its independence and charitable mission. This required diplomatic skill and moral courage that Oskar demonstrated throughout his tenure. During the Nazi years, Oskar faced particular pressure. The regime was suspicious of all independent organizations, especially those with international connections and traditional leadership structures. The Johanniter Orden's commitment to caring for all people, regardless of political affiliation or racial background, put it at odds with Nazi ideology. Oskar managed to protect the organization's autonomy while avoiding direct confrontation with the authorities. This balancing act required considerable skill. Oskar had to maintain the order's charitable activities while preventing Nazi infiltration or control. He protected Jewish members and continued providing aid to those the regime considered undesirable, all while maintaining a facade of political neutrality that allowed the organization to survive. After Germany's defeat in 1945, Oskar's leadership proved invaluable during the Reconstruction period. The Johanniter Orden's medical and social services were desperately needed in a country devastated by war and occupation. Oskar helped expand the organization's activities and rebuild its infrastructure, making it a significant factor in Germany's social recovery. Oskar's family life provided stability throughout these turbulent decades. In 1914, he had married Countess Ina Marie von Bassewitz, a union that proved both personally happy and dynastically productive. The couple had 4 children: Oskar, born in 1915, Burchard, born in 1917, Herzeleida, born in 1918, and Wilhelm Karl, born in 1922. Tragically, their eldest son Oskar died in 1939 at the age of 24, a loss that deeply affected the family. However, the other 3 children survived to continue the family line and maintain connections to both the Hohenzollern heritage and their father's charitable legacy. The relationship between Prince Oskar and his father was characterized by mutual respect and understanding. Kaiser Wilhelm II appreciated his son's ability to maintain family honor while serving German society in a non-political capacity. Unlike some of his other children, Oskar never embarrassed the family through extremist political associations or public scandals. This approval was significant because it demonstrated one successful path for adapting to post-imperial life. While other princes struggled with irrelevance or made compromising political choices, Oskar had found a way to maintain dignity, serve others, and preserve family honor simultaneously. Oskar's leadership of the Johanniter Orden also provided the Hohenzollern family with an institutional connection to German society that survived the monarchy's collapse. Through his work, the family maintained a positive public presence based on service rather than political claims. Prince Oskar died on January 27, 1958, having successfully guided the Johanniter Orden through some of the most challenging decades in German history. His death marked the end of 32 years of leadership that had preserved an ancient institution while adapting it to modern needs. His legacy demonstrates that royal children could find meaningful purpose in post-monarchical society through dedication to service and traditional values. Oskar's path offered an alternative to both political extremism and complete withdrawal. Engagement with society through charitable institutions that transcended political systems while maintaining connection to historical traditions. Born on December 17, 1890 at Berlin Palace, Prince Joachim Franz Humbert was the youngest of Kaiser Wilhelm II's sons, and his story would become the most tragic chapter in the family's adaptation to post-imperial life. Where his brothers found various ways to cope with the collapse of their world, Joachim would discover that he could not survive the transition from prince to private citizen. As the youngest son, Joachim enjoyed a childhood that was perhaps less burdened by explicit dynastic expectations than his older brothers experienced. By the time of his birth, the succession was secure through the crown prince, and his other brothers had already claimed their niches in military and naval service. This relative freedom might have been a blessing, but it also meant that Joachim entered adulthood without a clear sense of purpose or identity. Joachim's education followed the standard pattern for Prussian princes, but his temperament differed markedly from his siblings. He was sensitive, artistic, and emotionally volatile, qualities that were not well suited to the rigid military culture that dominated Hohenzollern family life. His tutors noted his intelligence and creativity, but also observed a tendency toward mood swings and emotional instability that would plague him throughout his life. When World War I erupted, Joachim was commissioned as an officer and sent to serve on various fronts. Military service proved challenging for him in ways that went beyond the normal dangers and hardships of warfare. The discipline, hierarchy, and emotional suppression required of a Prussian officer conflicted with his sensitive nature, and he struggled to adapt to military life. The war years were marked by increasing psychological difficulties for Joachim. He suffered from what would now be recognized as depression and anxiety, conditions that were poorly understood and inadequately treated in early 20th century military medicine. His family attributed his struggles to weakness of character rather than genuine mental illness, adding shame to his suffering. The collapse of 1918 struck Joachim with particular force. While his brothers had developed independent identities through military achievement, political engagement, or personal interests, Joachim's identity was entirely bound up with his status as a Prussian prince. When that status suddenly became meaningless, he found himself adrift in ways that his more adaptable siblings avoided. The establishment of the Weimar Republic presented Joachim with challenges he was unable to meet. The new democratic order had no place for princes, and the political and social upheaval of the early 1920s created an environment that exacerbated his psychological difficulties. He struggled to find employment, purpose, or even basic stability in a world that had been turned upside down. Joachim's personal life during this period reflected his broader struggles. In 1916, he had married Princess Marie Auguste of Anhalt, and the couple had one son, Karl Franz, born in 1916. However, the marriage was troubled from the beginning, strained by Joachim's psychological difficulties, financial problems, and the social upheaval surrounding them. Financial pressures added another layer to Joachim's difficulties. The family's assets had been severely affected by Germany's defeat and the political changes that followed. Like other German aristocrats, the Hohenzollerns faced inflation, property confiscation, and the general economic chaos of the early Weimar years. For someone as psychologically fragile as Joachim, these material concerns became overwhelming. The marriage began to disintegrate as Joachim's condition worsened. Princess Marie Auguste found herself unable to cope with her husband's depression and increasingly erratic behavior. The prospect of divorce loomed, carrying with it additional shame and social isolation that Joachim felt incapable of enduring. By 1920, Joachim's psychological state had deteriorated to the point where he was contemplating suicide. Family members were aware of his distress but lacked the understanding or resources to provide effective help. The stigma surrounding mental illness in aristocratic families meant that his condition was treated as a personal failing rather than a medical problem requiring professional intervention. On July 18, 1920, Prince Joachim shot himself at the family estate in Potsdam. He was only 29 years old. His suicide sent shockwaves through the German aristocracy and provided Republican newspapers with an opportunity to comment on the psychological toll of monarchy's collapse. The relationship between Joachim and his father was complicated by Kaiser Wilhelm II's inability to understand or help his youngest son. The Kaiser was a man of the 19th century, trained to view emotional difficulties as character flaws rather than medical conditions. His response to Joachim's struggles was frustration and disappointment rather than compassion, adding to the young prince's sense of isolation. Joachim's death represented the darkest consequence of the Hohenzollern family's fall from power. His son Karl Franz survived and continued the family line, eventually adapting to life as a private citizen in ways his father could not. But Joachim's tragedy highlighted the human cost of political upheaval and the particular vulnerability of those whose entire identity was bound up with institutions that could vanish overnight. His legacy serves as a reminder that historical change, however necessary or inevitable, carries personal costs that are often overlooked in political narratives. Joachim's story illustrates how the collapse of the old order could destroy individuals who lacked the psychological resources to adapt to radical change. Born on September 13, 1892 at Potsdam, Princess Viktoria Louise Adelheid Matilda Charlotte was Kaiser Wilhelm II's only daughter and youngest child. Her story would prove to be the most enduring of all the Kaiser's children, as she lived through nearly 9 decades of European transformation while serving as a bridge between the old imperial world and modern royalty. As the only daughter in a family of boys, Viktoria Louise occupied a special place in her father's affections from birth. The Kaiser doted on his daughter in ways that he never quite managed with his sons, and their relationship would remain close throughout both their lives. This paternal devotion would prove crucial during the family's years of exile and adjustment. Viktoria Louise's upbringing differed significantly from her brother's military-focused education. While they were prepared for roles as officers and potential rulers, she was groomed for the traditional royal daughter's destiny, a strategic marriage that would strengthen dynastic alliances and produce the next generation of European royalty. Her education emphasized languages, culture, and the social graces necessary for international royal society. She became fluent in multiple languages and developed a sophisticated understanding of European court politics that would serve her well throughout her long life. Unlike her brothers, who struggled to find purpose after the monarchy's collapse, Viktoria Louise possessed skills that remained valuable regardless of political systems. The defining moment of Viktoria Louise's young life came in 1913 when she married Ernest Augustus, Duke of Brunswick. This marriage was politically significant as it helped resolve long-standing tensions between the Hohenzollerns and the House of Hanover. The wedding was one of the last great gatherings of European royalty before World War I shattered the old order forever. The marriage proved personally happy as well as politically useful. Ernest Augustus and Viktoria Louise were well-matched temperamentally, and their union would produce 4 children who carried royal blood into the modern era. More importantly, the couple's relationship provided Viktoria Louise with emotional stability that helped her navigate the upheavals that followed. When revolution swept Germany in 1918, Viktoria Louise found herself in a unique position. As Duchess of Brunswick, she had her own political status independent of her father's imperial throne. However, the revolutionary tide that toppled the Kaiser also eliminated the smaller German monarchies, leaving Viktoria Louise and her husband as former royalty adapting to Republican reality. Unlike some of her brothers, Viktoria Louise adapted to this transition with remarkable grace. She understood that the old world was gone forever and focused on preserving what could be preserved while building new roles for herself and her family. This pragmatic approach would characterize her entire approach to post-imperial life. During the interwar years, Viktoria Louise and her husband lived quietly in Hanover, avoiding the political extremism that attracted some family members while maintaining connections to surviving European royal families. She became a link between the scattered remnants of pre-war European royalty and helped preserve networks that would prove important for post-war reconstruction. The Nazi period presented particular challenges for Viktoria Luise. The regime,